Hey, this is John McKechnie, and welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Joined as always by Mario Puig. Today, as you may know, it is the Combine. We are starting testing just in about an hour or so from this record time. So we're going to be giving you some reactions to the weigh-ins, all that good stuff, some things that we're going to be keeping an eye on this week in Indianapolis. Let's go. Welcome back in. RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by our friends over at WinBet. John McKechnie joined as always by Mario Puig. Mario, what are you looking for right now as far as the Combine? Has anything kind of come across your desk that has surprised you as far as the weigh-ins go this morning?
I'm just surprised on how few of them I can find because I'd like to find basically everybody, but I'm sure I'm missing something. There's probably somebody out there compiling this information, but I only really know about Daniel Jeremiah's account, and he's posted like 6 players, and one of them's Kenny Pickett with the hands. So I'm wondering more so about like the rest of these receivers, the tight ends, whoever they got anything on. I just kind of want to know the height, weight, because obviously we're waiting for the testing, and in between the weigh-ins and the testing, there's not a whole lot to do. And now they're not even giving me the first part. What am I supposed to do all day?
We're sorely missing the Charles Robinson mega thread from the Combine. That much is certain. But looking around just a little bit, I was surprised slightly by Drake London. He's obviously not small or anything, but I was expecting him to be a little bit closer to 6'5". He's more like just 6'4", like 212, I believe, and
219.
I guess 219. Okay, all right. So a little bit heavier, I guess, than I was expecting too, but
denser,
slightly shorter. But does that change your Mike Evans comp for him at all?
I guess Mike Evans is a very particular kind of comp. Like he was, I think, 6'5", 232 or something like that. And London is 6'3" and 7/8, so he'll be listed at 6'4". The 219 is I was trying to figure out on Mock Draftable, like using their database to figure out what that 219 checks in at for percentile. And I personally like to see a player have somewhat proximate percentiles for both their height and the weight. Like it's cool if a guy's tall or whatever, but if he's 90th percentile height and 25th percentile weight, that's actually kind of concerning for me. I'd like to see the weight keep up, the density keep up with their height. And London, I think, is like a tiny bit. His percentile for the height is a tiny bit ahead of the weight, but only a little bit. And London's one of the youngest players in the class, and certainly among the receivers in this class. So if you just imagine him being more toward his actual class age intersection as the average receiver, the average fourth-year receiver especially, you can imagine him weighing in this scenario around more like 225 next year. It's not that uncommon for guys to keep adding a little bit of weight the longer they're weightlifting in their lives. So I think London, even though he was shorter, he definitely eased some concern that I had about the density, because if you're actually 6'5", you can't play in the NFL at like 200 pounds. You have to weigh more like 225, ideally 230, 235, because with that height comes, especially like for receivers, it probably matters for the jam, just getting into your routes in the first place. It's like you're tall, you're a big target, but if you don't have density, you don't have anything to like defend yourself with. You're just this kite flying around, and these guys are shorter than you, but they're heavier and stronger than you, and they can kind of just knock you out of your route, barely let you start your route in the first place. So London being 6'4", 219 is actually a good thing for me. It just means he's like, a slightly different aesthetic of player than he would have been if he was truly 6'5". So I think everything's looking good for London. He's not expected to test that well, so I don't want to make it sound like he's completely safe exactly. Like if he runs a 4.64 or something, that'd be not very good. It might knock him into like the second round, where he'd still be a fine pick, but he's definitely in the hunt more with like Treylon Burks, I think, to be the the actual top receiver. Like it's possible one of those two is the top tier after the combine. Well, London's not running, I guess, so I guess we don't know about him, but is Burks running?
Yes, I believe so.
So yeah, we might know
basically
basically the top tier like right there, and London still can sink if he tests poorly later.
Right. So we'll have to wait on London's testing when they do the USC Pro Day, because London, if the listeners remember, injured his ankle mid-season.
Oh yeah, that's right. Crap.
And his, if you look at the overall target data from last season, like he's still like kind of up there on the leaderboard despite missing like the last 5 games of the season. Like that's how much he was getting peppered with targets. Like it was pretty much every weekend you would go into it expecting him to get the ball at least 15 times, and it just felt normal. That's how crazy he was.
Yeah, and he's probably age-wise close to a lot of guys who are technically still sophomores, so he's demonstrating a pretty uncommon natural ability to play receiver. And all there really is for me, my process to scout him at this point, all that there's left for is the testing, because if he tests even just kind of decent, something other than badly, I think production like his and the likely skill set that it indicates makes him like a clear standout starting receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm sold on him as well. But again, that testing component a little bit later on in the draft process will be key for him. In your mind, because we were just talking about Treylon Burks, checking in at 6'2", 225, almost 10-inch hands, big dude, as we all we're very well aware. What does he need to run in your mind to stay safe or potentially stamp his place as the number 1 receiver going into April?
Well, it'd be a bit pending what happens with London and even some of these other guys too. The Ohio State guys, other receivers that are escaping my mind right now. But with Burks, he's really interesting to me because like I don't actually know that much about him, and the stuff that I've heard or read about on the internet, on Twitter, I don't know how reliable, like how much I should take it seriously. But some of the things you read about Burks are kind of like, he could be an all-timer combine tester. And so he's interesting for the question of what if, I guess, even aside from what the minimum is, because it's hard to not get greedy with a player like him and wonder like, well, what if he runs like a 4.37 at 225 pounds? That would be totally freakish, and I don't know who would be particularly close to that number. That'd be like T.O. DK Metcalf level of kind of like freakish size, speed. So we'll see, but he doesn't need to do that. He could be the top receiver by just running like especially if London disappoints. Like if London runs like a 4.59 and Burks runs a 4.47, Burks wins that. He's the top receiver at that point. So he I think I would have to put Burks as my slight favorite for the top wide receiver 1, even though I have London and even Jameson Williams in the same tier, just because we have so much reason to believe Burks will test well. And with London, it's more of like, we got our fingers crossed kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So Burks definitely has the opportunity here to stamp it. Andrew, our listener, viewer on YouTube, points out that also, and I was wondering where you're going with the Burks thing at first. I thought you were going to be mentioning his penchant to cull the feral hog population in Arkansas.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. He should probably stop doing that.
Those things are crazy, but I mean, I guess
John,
you're sending someone to get
literally what killed Robert Baratheon, and I don't know how to process real world events without pop culture analogies, like HBO only. So
you seem like a big Euphoria guy,
right? Yeah, like that's my new show. But yeah, back when Game of Thrones was on, this would have been a special. When season 1 was airing, if Treylon Burks made that hog announcement, it would have been like, no, you can't do that. But everyone forgot that boars are really dangerous. You should probably have some distance between them and not try to like actually wrestle them.
Yeah, get up close and personal. Yeah,
one knife.
Yeah, this man is not just in a helicopter. He's in there. Amazing stuff. All right, let's move on over to someone who I feel like, or two guys out of the Big Ten that I feel like have had varying levels of first round hype one way or the other. And I think in the case of David Bell, I think that he measured in really well, 6'2", 212. I think that's a good, starting point for him. I'm worried about Jahan Dotson dropping a little bit. 5'10 and a half, 178. That's pretty slight. If you look at, and we have this on RotoWire.com, if you go to stats, we have the NFL Combine and Pro Day stats. If you do, and you can filter it however you like to customize it to whichever prospect you're trying to scout. And there's not a particularly great list of guys with that measurements of 5'10 and under 180 pounds. I mean, there's obviously the cases of Mecole Hardman, Deshaun Jackson, those type of guys, but I don't think that Dotson really offers that same type of game. Maybe best case scenario, he can be a little bit like an Elijah Moore, but even then, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think Moore was the better prospect coming out, so a little bit worried on Dotson right now.
Yeah, Elijah Moore is a really, really good prospect. So it's definitely, or it's likely true. I think that Dotson is not all that close, but still could be quite good. But you're right. If the problem is not just the weight, it's actually worse. I think that he's 5'11" rather than 5. Like they'll round that one up to 5'11", and I would rather he be 5'10", 178. I think that's almost exactly what Elijah Moore was. They might have rounded him up from like 5'9" and 5/8 or something. But Elijah Moore was credited with it anyway. I guess even now I kind of can't believe he actually ran it, but he was credited with like a 4.37 40. So having it's better that Moore is an inch shorter, in my opinion, because the density is less of a liability. And the 4.37 is a really high number to live up to. So maybe Dotson runs something like that. But unless he does, he's kind of just like out of range entirely from that kind of tier of prospect. Like he's still a very good one because his production is so great that it seems very likely that Dotson really knows how to play receiver, but he probably has less tools to work with than some of these other, assuming he doesn't, burn up the track. If he surprises us with like a 4.38 or something, I'll have to be like, oh, well, never mind. I guess being that fast, you can get away with being, quote, too small. But, when you are too small, and he basically is, you have to make up for it somehow. You're not really going to just like coast by about it. Like you can make up for it, but that one thing is true about him at the very least. And if he doesn't test well, and if he doesn't specifically have like some of the fastest running times in this wide receiver combine class, then he's at risk of, I would be surprised if he fell quite this far, but he's at risk of something like what happened with Amon-Ra St. Brown last year, where if you have a slot specific, and I'm assuming if Dotson is basically too skinny and doesn't have speed to offset being too skinny, then he's liable to get moved into the slot, because if you're too skinny, too slow, whatever, it's like usually the expressions of, space that the ways, length and velocity expressed in space don't matter as much in a shorter part of the field. And indeed, St. Brown was awesome there, but we didn't know for sure if he was ever really going to get the shot. And Dotson falls into that kind of category, I think, if he runs only like a, 4.53 or something like that.
Yeah, that would certainly be an issue. So
Deontay Johnson is pretty close too, but
okay.
He was like 5'10", 180, I want to say. And I think he actually did run a 4.53. So that's like the worst case scenario. That's like the absolute worst Dotson can do and still project in the like top 75, I think.
Okay, so we'll be keeping a close eye on him. And I think one guy that we've talked about over the course of these last few weeks as we've been kind of digging our heels in on draft coverage, George Pickens is going to test. And he was saying on, I think it was Wednesday afternoon, that, he's expecting himself to run 4.4 flat or better. If he does that, I mean, I think that, like the whole conversation about him being like a fringe first rounder goes away. And then, he definitely switches places with Dotson. And I think he enters the conversation as like a top 25 pick, maybe even higher.
Yeah. I mean, I guess us two, we're just kind of like preaching to our own choir at this one. Cause it was to me always strange that Pickens wasn't just penciled into the first round of this draft, or whichever one he declared for anyway. the moment that he had that true freshman year 2 years ago or whatever, because like, granted, he didn't have the chance to really hit the high volume mark exactly. Like you do want to see the volume eventually more than the 780 yards or whatever he had. But A, that's a good number for a freshman year, and he was the best receiver on the team. And B, his efficiency was just off the charts. So any other time, pretty much, like there's extremely weird cases like that Jeff Fuller or whatever from Texas A&M, a long time ago, who had a really big freshman and sophomore year, and he looked like he was going to be awesome, and then he just kind of never did anything again. But usually, almost always, when a player has a true freshman year, the way Pickens did at the age that he did, he was, must have been like 18 and a half basically, and already was probably like a top 5 wide receiver in the SEC. Like that kind of data point is so uncommonly strong in itself that I barely cared to follow Pickens after that. I was just like, no, he's going in the first round. I don't need to watch more of this. So yeah, to see him kind of get just like overlooked, and especially hear people talk about like the ACL, it's done. He had the injury.
he came back already.
Right. Yeah. It's like you can't say like, oh, he might be injury prone because of an ACL. It's like what, like 30% of players probably have ACL tears or something going into their rookie year or something. It's not what it was. It's not the Kajana Carter injury or something. So he's going to be fine, and if he can actually run at maximum strength, I don't know if anything in his profile at that point that's anything less than strong. It's not like I'm not like glossing over some concern or another because of these other positive traits. It's like I can't find what's supposed to be wrong about him at that point.
No, he's about to like really, I think, take off. Really looking forward to that. I'm not expecting a Chris Conley-esque combine performance.
If he did that, he should be like the first receiver pick.
Yeah.
I don't think. Yeah, if he tests, low 4.4, and what is he, like 6'2", 200, something like that. So he's not exactly bulky. It would be nice to see him have the low 4.4, or ideally the 4.3. But if he does have like especially the high 4.3 at 200, I don't see any reason he should fall out of the first 15 picks.
No, he's that good, and I think everyone's about to realize that come this afternoon. Another interesting one. Let's see here. It was Justin Ross. He checked in at like 6'4", but like only just a bit over 205 pounds. So
he was actually 6'4".
Yes.
Interesting.
So that to me, that seeing that and then hearing you talk about the Burks fit or the Drake London element of, okay, he is X tall, but he needs, X amount of weight to be effective at that height. And in Ross's case, that's a little bit concerning to me if he's going to be that tall and not as dense.
Yeah. So did you happen to remember where you saw that? I was trying to find these things. But like I said, I only had the Jeremiah account. Anyway, that's interesting to know. And it makes me wonder that much more how fast he expects to run, how high he thinks he can jump. But he's not testing, is he? He's coming back from that broken foot.
Right. He had foot surgery.
So, yeah, maybe he would have been able to train a little bit more for mass if his foot wasn't messed up. I don't know. But yeah, being 6'4", 205, that's, I don't want to say it's not necessarily like a fatal flaw or anything, but it is pretty concerning, and he's like getting right on the border of what's permissible, But what he can do is, it's kind of like Dotson. He can earn more cushion if he tests really well. Like if he's 6'4", 205, maybe we'd rather see him be pushing 212, 215 or whatever. But if he's running a 4.57 at 215, then it's not as good as him running, the 4.41 at 205 or something like that. So if he's fast, he can, both just kind of in general in terms of balancing his profile and in practice, thinking about actually playing the game. It's like the liability of being too skinny as a receiver usually shows up with the jam, and it can show up in traffic trying to make a catch too, but we have pass interference and things like that to make up for it. Getting away from the jam and like dictating the kind of cushion that the kind of approach in the jam in the first place is definitely subject to how much speed you have, to like how much they pay, how high of a price they pay if they miss with that jam attempt. Like if they can't recover in the event that they miss, they might not try to jam you as much. They might, have a bit of a cushion to the jam. So if he's fast enough, he can get away with it. But if Ross runs like a low 4.5 or something, that would be a little concerning to me.
I think so too. What do you make of how his role changed a little bit this past year? The Clemson offense, as we talked about, really just kind of fell off a cliff. But do you think that it helps his profile that he worked out of the slot a little bit this year?
He had such a weird pattern of usage at Clemson. Like that true freshman year, he had a pretty low catch rate because they were just doing bombs all day,
Mm-hmm.
And then even his second year, when T. Higgins was still there, they for some reason started using him at like a 13-yard per catch kind of depth, I want to say. And he actually struggled with that change. Like his production went below the Clemson baseline his second season. And he went above the baseline this last year after missing the third season in between. But I think it was actually kind of a mistake to try to use him at a lower depth. Like it seems like he's most effective when he's running farther downfield and away from the traffic. Or at least that's what I, kind of assume looking at his production over those 3 seasons. But in any case, this last year, he did produce above the Clemson baseline again. And I know people will look at his numbers and say like, oh, he regressed. He had a down year. I actually think it's clearly a better season he had in 2021 than what he had in 2019. Because, he was above the baseline in this case. In the other case, he was basically in the spot. He tended to be in the spotlight when the Clemson passing game struggled. Like that was.
And I also just don't feel like he was fully healthy at really any point this season. Like we talked about the foot injury, but also had, some other stuff, I think even dating back to like fall camp. So like, I just don't know if he was even 100% at all this past season.
Yeah. And again, that foot really might've kept him from adding on a few more pounds to his frame. So he's a weird case for sure. And I think he's still, I want to err on the side of optimism just because he was so great as just like a bomber specialist that freshman year with Trevor Lawrence. I don't even really know why they changed his usage, but in the first case, when they used him as like a downfield guy, he outproduced. Granted, it was more boom or bust. It was a smaller and more volatile sample of targets, but they got more production out of him than they did T. Higgins that year. And T. Higgins is a little bit older than Ross, so maybe it's possible to to produce a little bit better than T. Higgins your true freshman year at Clemson and then still turn out to not be any good, but it seems difficult to explain.
Right. So I'm a little bit more undecided on Ross than I thought I would be at this point. And
yeah, me too.
So now we're not going to get the combine testing from him. So, hopefully he does the full battery at Clemson's pro day so we can get some more data on him. But it's just an interesting case. I still think he has really high upside based on, what you're talking about, his true freshman season. I mean, like for him to just burn Notre Dame and Alabama to the ground the way that he did as a true freshman, like that's not nothing.
Yeah, unless he somehow lost a step or something. And by the way, like especially the way that true freshman year went, I think we can expect him to test pretty well. I don't know how you do that stuff unless you're at the very least fast, like those to earn that level of playing time and that usage and also the effectiveness that he had. It's like, it's inconceivable that player wouldn't be able to play in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. Before we move on over we're going to get into those Ohio State receivers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, here in a second. But first, we got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. And we got a message from our friends over at WynnBET. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 9 states. That's Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. Register for WynnBET today, make a qualifying deposit, and wager to receive $200 in free bets. Promotion may vary by state. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. All right, let's unpack a couple of things here. talking about the Ohio State guys, but our viewer Andrew's chiming in a little bit. He's making the point. I think a lot of these guys find a way if they're undersized, and expanding on that a little bit. Big guys have an advantage, but I don't necessarily classify undersized guys at a disadvantage, generally speaking. And I tend to agree with that. It's case by case and role by role. If the guy is used the right way, if he's undersized, like, it can obviously still work. I think the point we're making is that, like, if you're
there's a sum of traits to keep in mind. I would tell people to try to think of it as like in an RPG when you're starting out with your character and they give you like 20 points to give for their different traits. It's like, yeah, you can win, being bad at magic or whatever, but it's because you're good enough with our two-handed weapons and bows and arrows. And if you don't have your bows and arrows in your handed weapons, then it matters that you were not otherwise a developed mage. So these guys who are when I'm saying like they're too light or whatever, or not fast enough, it's like that's relative to an ideal that despite falling short of it, they can make up for the lost ground by having an excess of some other beneficial trait. But there are times too when a guy does something a certain way in college, and it's not like his fault or anything. He's actually a good player, but he gets to the NFL and he just can't affect time and space the same way. He can't like reach as high as he did, as fast as he did, or as fast and high enough as he needs to in the NFL. And things that he got away with in college, he just doesn't anymore. And I mean, that's the way I see it anyway, as far as explaining most cases where guys fail for reasons that people otherwise can't figure out. It's like, well, he was so good in college and he was, he had a good 3-cone. It's like, well, if he won by running in a straight line in college, then his good 3-cone doesn't matter. And, that's why he doesn't get it done anymore. But yeah, you just got to find a way to get it done somehow. And, the more capital as a prospect you have to work with, the more likely you are to, prove exceptions to various rules that we otherwise don't want guys to follow. So
dovetailing off of that, which receiver would make the best mage from this class?
Well, I guess if Justin Ross is so tall and skinny, maybe he would make a more convincing, like robed wizard. Because you don't really see like big fat wizards, do you? I don't remember that.
No, they get their cardio in.
They're like lanky and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's how they appear in my mind's eye. So
I'm kind of just hitting, the auto enter on the last thing we were talking about. But yeah, Justin Ross, I guess.
I'm into it. I like that. Let's see here. All right. So as promised, let's get into these Ohio State guys a little bit. Obviously, that we still don't have their testing numbers. We do have their measurements. Chris Olave checks in just a little bit over 6 foot, even 187 pounds, 9.5-inch hands. Garrett Wilson on the other side, 5'11" and 6'8", so just a hair under 6 foot, 183. So were those a little bit lighter than you were expecting? I know for me, I was expecting both of them to be closer to like the mid 190s, something like that. And that's I think what we had them listed at before we re-entered their official data. So like what they were listed at Ohio State was a little bit inflated, it appears.
Yeah, Olave, I guess he's more in line with the expectation. I didn't have any like set height weight specifically that I was expecting, but what he came up with was kind of in that range. Wilson, a little bit less than the range I had in mind. I don't know why exactly. I guess just because Olave strikes me as just kind of more of a finesse player. I didn't really associate mass with him. I didn't really see the need for him to develop mass. But Wilson, I mean, he does a lot of like running in traffic, running after the catch and stuff like that. So I figured he might want to be more like, a little bit closer to a running back kind of build than a pure receiver kind of build like Olave, because Olave is a pure receiver. He doesn't really need that stuff. I mean, it's fine for Wilson. I don't really care. I mean, you can be 6 foot 183 and still be a really good player. And since he's 6 foot 183 and I expect him to be good, it's that's very specifically how I think it'll go. But yeah, I did imagine him being a little bit more like 195 by now for some reason.
Yeah, I did as well. So, but I still think that he's going to test.
Yeah,
Well
he should
here
test
in
very
Indy.
well, and that'll largely be why it'll be easy to look past because it's like, oh, if you have a 4.37, who cares?
Yep, pretty much. So I like that call there. Um, let's move on over to the running backs. We don't have measurements just yet for them. I believe that comes tomorrow along with their workouts. But just, outside of, we talked about Kenneth Walker and Brees Hall a little bit in previous podcasts. Let's unpack maybe some other guys that are flying a little bit under the radar going into their combines that you think, might be able to move themselves up.
So it's a lot easier for me to kind of run through my process with receivers and tight ends at this point, and maybe even quarterbacks than running backs, because it does matter quite a bit for me the way that they test. And there's been too many times in the past where I, kind of try to guess ahead of time how quick or fast or whatever I think some running back might be based on their tape. And it's just really easy to be wrong. So I try not to really even think about it too much until we get the confirmed height, weights, and testing. And then that's more when I start to really dive into the running backs. So yeah, I'm not nearly as set in my order, and I don't have as much to say generally about the running backs at this point. But I do agree with the Brees Hall consensus, and I don't know. Spiller is one of those guys that's tough for me. I gotta especially get the testing numbers on him because
I keep leaving him out whenever we're talking about running backs. I don't mean to specifically, but I don't understand the hype.
It's like one of those guys that's not even really that important to talk about because his standing is so undisputed. It's like everybody seems to agree, like he's top 3 running back, and there's nothing really to get too worked up about there. But I have a lot of trouble figuring out what I think about him, and the testing I need at the very least to get a better idea, because it's tough for me to think through what he is exactly. But he's more for me in, I guess, like the 3 to 4 round fringe pending his numbers. There's nothing that really jumps out to me. Like, he seems like he should be fine, serviceable, or at least in the NFL. It's just kind of like, I feel like it's easy to find serviceable running backs. So I kind of just sort of, unless he tests better than I'm expecting, I kind of figure I'll be a little disinterested in him relative to most people. But it's not because I mean to count him out or anything. But yeah, the other running backs, I mean, I don't know how these guys are going to test either, but 2 players who could be pretty interesting to me if they do test all right is the Byu Tyler Algier. Not much reason to think he tests well, but if he does, I'll be kind of interested. He wouldn't necessarily be a slam dunk pick even if he did test really well. Like, you can remember some weird cases like that Alex Barnes from Kansas State where he tested really well, and the NFL was just like, yeah, we don't care. For a minute there. Yeah, he was so good at Kansas State too. So
could have been a really nice little compliment to Derrick Henry. It's like, okay, Derrick Henry's coming out for a play. Now you get to get bludgeoned by this guy who I think had the most bench press reps for a running back maybe ever.
Well, he had like a 3-cone or something. He was doing really good. But yeah, it's like, I guess Algier, he could go undrafted for all I know, but I'm definitely drawn toward the big plays. Like, he has an obscene number of just big carries the last 2 years, and a lot of touchdowns too. So it's like, you look at his yards per carry and it's like 8 or whatever, and you don't realize that it's like, yeah, that's with him scoring a touchdown every 10 carries too. So just breaking the defense repeatedly over and over and over the last 2 years. So I'd like to see him weigh in and test pretty decent, because if he's an NFL caliber athlete, I definitely would be interested in him as like a mid-round sleeper or whatever. Other one was, I guess, that Florida running back, Damien Pierce. Is that his name?
Can you explain why he's getting the amount of hype that he is? Like, I've seen a lot of people bring him up, and I'm not sure if it's just because
it's just
the
thirst,
first
probably.
3 are so settled. Yeah. So I'm trying to invent one almost.
I'm intrigued enough by him in the meantime, but I'm definitely not struck by him. It's not like I'm only naming him because it's like I had to name a running back, But if I had a blank space entirely, I'd probably go with more receivers and tight ends, because there's not really much reason. Like, you look at Pierce and you don't really think like, oh, he's fast, he's quick.
No,
he might be. It's kind of hard to tell from tape sometimes, but it's not something you expect exactly. But he's interesting because his production, especially last year, was really good. Like as a runner, he had his best year by far last year. And the whole while at Florida, he was playing pretty well as a part-time like pass catching specialist. So if you can scale up the pass catching efficiency that he showed there, and if he tests good enough to project for a 3-down sort of function, I guess at that point I don't know why Pierce can't be a really good NFL player. But in the meantime, it's more like a shortage of alternatives that makes me notice him in the first place. Like normally a guy like him, he'd be in your interesting round 6-7 pile, but if he tests anything other than bad, it's like in a class without much depth, you almost have to wonder about him going for like the 5th round or something, even though he's still not that interesting of a prospect. Guys like him go undrafted all the time,
I think so too. And I guess I'm personally not expecting him to test all that well. And
me neither. There's like nobody else that I know of, I'm almost wondering, I guess there's that Rashad White or whatever from Arizona State, but he's kind of strange. I don't know what to think of him. There's just kind of not that many running backs this year. I don't know.
One guy that we haven't really talked about yet is Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
So I've seen a good amount of Gio Bernard comps for him.
Yeah. I don't know. I think people try to get worked up about players like him because they want to basically sound so smart about how they know that it's good to pass more than run. And they're like, oh, he's a pass catching back. That's the future. Gio Bernard's top 10. I know no one's actually said this, but there's a certain subsection of people that cheerlead for, I call them scab backs. These running backs who are basically false running backs and only play because of formational and like circumstantial forces that kind of reduce the use of a running back, like hurry up. You don't really need a running back and hurry up except to pick up a blitz, I guess. So yeah, I'm not interested in that category of player just because I'm just, I guess, ideologically biased against it. I want players who can actually run, and if I need a player who can catch a 6-yard pass, I'll find a receiver who can do it. So yeah, we'll see if Kyron Williams tests well, though, and I'm meaning better than Gio Bernard, better than whoever really. Nyheim Hines is kind of one of these backs, and I don't think he's very good, but he has 4.37 speed, and it hasn't made a difference. So generally, a guy like Williams, I would have liked to have seen just plain dominate more in college. But if he tests well athletically, and if he's actually fast, actually quick, there's definitely reason in that case to project him being a viable pass catcher in the NFL, and thus pushing for like 300, 400 snap kind of role. But man, I'm so bored with those kinds of players. I want players who can actually like really propel an offense. People who can run with the football.
Give me more Nick Chubbs.
Yes, simply give me more Nick Chubbs, please.
Did you see his weightlifting video from earlier this week?
No. What did he do now?
Just like real casually, like squatting like 500 pounds or something.
He's insane.
Like
it's so funny because you look at a picture of him, and then if you ever see those like high school track pictures of him, you're like, oh, this has been he's been 27-year-old Nick Chubb all this time. Like he's like fully grown man in like 12th grade, just looking like a janitor and sitting in class or something.
Solving various equations on the whiteboard in the hallway. Did recently just watch Good Will Hunting, unrelated, but I do love how Chubb will like go back to his high school and work out, and like you see in the video, like I can't imagine being the kid in the squat rack right next to him being like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, like, I should consider other career paths, evidently.
I think that's what you need to be able to do. I don't think I got that. I'm going to try being small.
I'm trying to look through I guess even as far as that category goes, James Cook is more interesting to me, I guess, I mean, we'll see if Williams is the one who has all the wheels and Cook is just kind of like a quick, skinny guy, then I take it back. But in addition to Cook, there's also Treston Ebner to keep in mind, and maybe even White, I guess, in that category. So it's like, I guess another reason I can't get excited about Kyron Williams is like, I'm not convinced enough that he's uniquely good as a pass catcher in this class either,
Yeah, I think that Cook probably has like a little bit more natural ability. I mean, George would split him out wide, or they'd use him a lot on passing downs, and he had a really explosive output in those type of roles. Like you can run him downfield and he's going to catch it.
Yeah, so other than, those guys, I feel safe in kind of writing off Brian Robinson. He's just backup, I think.
Yep.
If there's another guy who pops up, it's going to have to just, I suppose, be someone who tests surprisingly well. You got to watch out. You can't just be like, oh, Jeremy Langford, he's our savior now. Like that's not enough. They have to be like a good, like the workout detail has to make them simply more interesting. It can't be like the entire reason they're interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I guess if, I don't know, something goofy, like if Jerome Ford runs like a 4.4 flat, then I guess I might have to reconsider things with him,
Sure, exactly. So yeah, the testing will definitely clear some things up in what's kind of a muddied running back class where tons of moving parts, not too many set tiers really so far. So definitely looking forward to seeing them work out Friday, I believe it is. Any other thoughts here before we sign off? Any predictions or anything else that you're keeping an eye on for this weekend?
Let me try to regather my thoughts real quick on the receivers and the tight ends, because I'm really eager to see how the tight ends play out. Actually, there's a lot that could be important in this. A lot of this 2022 draft class overall could kind of contains the biggest stories could be like tight ends in this class if they test a certain way. If Trey McBride and Isaiah Likely test legitimately fast and legitimately quick, they could all of a sudden be like, I don't know, top 40 kind of players who could catch specifically a lot of passes in the NFL and be maybe fantasy impacts even early in their careers. I've seen some people a little bit lower on this Jalen Weidermeier or whatever his name is, but I think I'm higher than most people on him. I see people complaining like, oh, he's just, he's not as flashy, he's too sluggish or whatever. It's like true freshmen who play as much as him and draw as many targets as him tend to stay playing football, like they don't tend to just disappear one day. So if he tests as well as top recruits often do, I'll be pretty interested in Weidermeier, even if he's one of those, better in the NFL than in college kind of players. But otherwise, yeah, there's a lot to sort out at receiver. I mean, I'm really interested to see how those Ohio State guys test. Wandel Robinson is another guy that I'm really eager to. I don't know if he's going to run. But yeah, I think that's everybody who's like in my biggest names category. I guess it was worth mentioning quickly. Looks like Skye Moore was officially listed at 5'10", which is interesting because his first couple of years at Western Michigan, he was listed at 5'9". So I don't know if that was just them being not generous, or I don't know if he like grew a half an inch over the past few years. But he's interesting because he's like well built with that kind of frame, and if he tests well, he could push for like the second round or something at receiver.
Yeah, I do like Skye Moore, so that's a good call there. And I do tend to agree with you that the tight end seems to be like an underserved topic point when it comes to this draft class, because I feel like after last year, you had Kyle Pitts, and then you kind of had nobody. I mean, Freiermuth ended up having he had a better season than I think pretty much anyone could have expected, but there was no real tight end depth last year, and there isn't a Kyle Pitts in this class. I mean, there's a reason why everyone just called him a unicorn last year, but there's a lot of guys that really could be productive NFL tight ends here.
Yeah, and so I mentioned Weidermeier, McBride, and Likely, and I've seen other people talk glowingly of Rucker, the Ohio State one, and even Otten, the Washington one. So I don't even really know who those guys are yet, to be totally honest. So if there's that many legitimate candidates fighting for that top role, then I'm actually pretty excited to watch how it plays out, because this could be a group with like 5 or 6 starters in it at tight end.
I think so too. I'm a fan of Cole Turner out of Nevada.
Oh right, Cole Turner. Yeah, I keep forgetting about him.
He's good. The per catch numbers and per target numbers aren't going to like blow you away, but
they're totally good though, because he was a volume catcher too. So it's like when you're taking up that much of a share of that productive of a passing game at Nevada, the more volume you have, the less efficiency you need to demonstrate, as long as you're not like going south of the baseline. So Turner's production actually grades really good for me.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's reassuring, and I think that the film showed him to be a pretty impressive athlete, and we'll be able to see if
There's
he
also
can
the
stamp that or not.
UCLA guy is kind of interesting. Oh, Charlie Kohler. So yeah, there's a bunch of interesting tight ends. Otherwise, there was one more receiver I wanted to mention. I wanted a stupid like big sleeper guy that I'm curious about is the Rutgers one. I want to if he tests well, he could all of a sudden be like a top 75 pick for me.
I do like Bo Melton. Always respected him for sticking it out at Rutgers when things were not great.
Yeah.
So cheers to him for that one. And one last item I'll throw your way. I believe is Daniel Jeremiah. I saw a graphic on NFL Network. Expected fastest 40, Danny Gray out of SMU.
Huh. Yeah, he was a receiver. I was having some trouble figuring out what I thought about him because his production is not that interesting. That detail helps clarify why anyone was interested in him, I guess, because it was hard to figure out just at a glance,
Sure.
I'm guessing he's not much. Like, I'm guessing if he's anything, he's just kind of like another Colby Listenby type because he wasn't that productive. But I get if SMU had total crap quarterbacks who could only throw like 5 yards or whatever, then I guess that could have hurt Gray more than it might have made it hard for him to produce, even if he was good. It's like even Cortland Sutton caught like 45 fewer passes than what's his name that one year. Trey Quinn.
God, that's right.
Jarvis Landry had way bigger numbers than Odell Beckham and stuff like that. So sometimes a bum quarterback can make a receiver just not really have a chance. But I'll have to look more at Gray because I did not know that he was supposed to be that fast.
Yeah, and if he is, then we'll certainly kind of have to take note. But that was always kind of the summation of like those SMU receivers, whether it was Gray, Rashee Rice, Reggie Roberson.
Oh, Roberson, right?
Yes, I think he's just a little bit overaged, and his injury history is so concerning to where like I'm probably out on him.
Yeah, if he tests really well, he's still in play. But if he tests anything other than very well at his age and the injury history, he's probably a priority free agent at most at that point.
Yeah, so a little bit worried there when it comes to Roberson, and a little intrigued when it comes to Danny Gray. So a little SMU talk here to round out the show today. But that's going to do it for us here. We'll be back next week breaking down our reactions from the full battery of testing at the Combine. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by our friends over at WynnBET.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com